What if I told you that a simple housekeeper managed to confront the most feared millionaire in the capital, saved his business from $1 million betrayal, and then discovered they were half-siblings? This former teacher had been hiding her true identity for months, but when she found the inheritance documents, everything changed forever. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? If you want to find out how she completely transformed a domestic tyrant and revealed a shocking family secret that no one saw coming, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. You absolutely won't believe how this story ends. In the prestigious Beacon Hill neighborhood of Boston, a neoclassical manor stood majestically among historic buildings, with its courtyards of imported limestone and gardens adorned with wisteria that perfumed the morning air. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with that of warm scones, creating an atmosphere that could have been welcoming, if not for the shouting echoing in the main hall. Incompetent! Look at these stains on the floor. Are you blind or simply incapable? The voice of Harrison Thornfield, the most feared publishing magnate in New England, resonated against the frescoed walls, while a young maid, with trembling hands and teary eyes, stared at the imported limestone floor where no stain was visible. 20 pairs of eyes observed the scene in silence, heads bowed and breaths held. No one dared to intervene. No one, until that moment. Mr. Thornfield, you may have money, but you don't have the right to treat people this way. The silence that followed was more deafening than the previous shouting. Slowly, like a predator disturbed during its meal, Harrison turned toward the source of that firm and decisive voice. His icy eyes met the determined gaze of a middle-aged woman with dark hair interwoven with silver strands gathered in an impeccable chignon and a perfectly ironed grey uniform. "How dare you?" he began, his voice dangerously low. "My name is Eleanor Blackwood. I'm the new housekeeper," she replied calmly, without lowering her gaze. "And my contract states that I must ensure harmony in this house. Harmony, sir, never comes from humiliation." In that precise moment, in the rarefied air of that Boston manor, something changed irreversibly, as if fate itself had held its breath, waiting for years for this encounter. Dignity is not a privilege that comes with wealth, but a right that is defended with courage. This truth, which Eleanor carried sewn into her soul, was about to take root in apparently sterile ground, but secretly hungry for authenticity. The hills of Virginia had forged Eleanor Blackwood's character long before she set foot on the polished limestone of Thornfield Manor. Raised among ancient oak trees and traditions as old as the stones of colonial villages, she had learned that true strength doesn't reside in muscles or power, but in the ability to remain standing when everything suggests kneeling. The morning after the confrontation with Harrison Thornfield, Eleanor woke at dawn. From the window of her small attic room, she watched Boston slowly awaken, so different from her Virginia town. Here, everything was fast, cold, calculated. She prepared carefully, wearing the same grey uniform as the day before, but adding a silver pin in the shape of an oak leaf that her mother had given her. "To remind you who you are, even when you're far from home," she had told her. "Who am I now?" Eleanor murmured to the mirror, studying the fine lines that years had drawn around her hazel eyes. A teacher turned housekeeper, a mother far from her child, a woman who can no longer afford to bow her head. The letter she kept on her bedside table, which had arrived the previous week from her town, weighed like a boulder. Her son Oliver needed an expensive operation, and her small teacher's pension wouldn't be enough. The salary offered by Thornfield Manor was 3 times higher than any she could have found elsewhere. She had no choice. She descended the stairs with determined steps, preparing for a day she imagined would be difficult. Harrison Thornfield didn't seem the type of man who easily forgot affronts. In the kitchen, she found the rest of the staff already at work. When she entered, conversations abruptly stopped, followed by curious and admiring glances. "Good morning," she said simply, heading toward the coffee maker. The cook, a robust woman with perpetually flushed cheeks, approached her. "In 20 years of service," she whispered, "I've never seen anyone speak to the master like that and show up for work the next day." Eleanor smiled slightly. "I'm not here to create problems, Mrs. Winters, Martha Winters. Everyone calls me Martha. Martha. I'm here to do my job and do it well." "The master has called a staff meeting in half an hour," interjected the butler, an austere man with a permanently worried expression. "It's the first time in 5 years." Eleanor nodded, sipping her coffee. She wouldn't be intimidated, not this time. The meeting was held in the Great Hall, under the imposing fresco depicting the triumph of Mercury, god of commerce, an appropriate choice for a family whose fortune was born from the publishing trade. Harrison made his punctual entrance, impeccably dressed in a dark blue suit that seemed to accentuate the coldness of his eyes. "From today," he announced without preamble, "Mrs. Blackwood will supervise the domestic staff. I expect efficiency, perfection, and above all, discretion. Anyone who isn't up to standard will be immediately replaced." He cast a penetrating look at Eleanor, a silent challenge. He was granting her power only to test her, waiting for her failure. "I won't disappoint you, sir," she responded calmly. "We'll see," he replied, before turning and leaving the room. When everyone had left, Eleanor remained alone in the great hall. She gently ran a hand over the marble of an antique table. "What game are you playing, Harrison Thornfield?" she murmured. "And why do I have the feeling that none of us truly knows the rules?" The manor seemed to live on silences, the heavy ones that followed Harrison's outbursts, the resigned ones of the staff, and especially the dense and impenetrable one that enveloped the lady of the house, Vivian Thornfield. During her 3rd week at Thornfield Manor, Eleanor finally met her. She was dusting rare volumes in the library when a slender figure appeared on the threshold. An elegant woman, with blonde hair gathered in a perfect chignon and an ivory-colored dress that seemed to accentuate her pale fragility. "Excuse me," said Eleanor, interrupting her work. "I didn't mean to disturb you, ma'am." Vivian observed her with blue eyes that seemed like deep water. "You must be the new housekeeper," she said with a thin but surprisingly melodious voice, "the one who dared to answer back to my husband." There was no judgment in her voice, only genuine curiosity. "Eleanor Blackwood, ma'am. I'm sorry if I caused problems." A hint of a smile appeared on Vivian's thin lips. "On the contrary, it's rare to see someone who reminds my husband that he, too, is human." She approached the shelves, lightly touching the spine of the books with slender fingers. "Do you like to read, Mrs. Blackwood?" "Always have, ma'am. I was a teacher before." Vivian's eyes lit up slightly. "Really? And what did you teach?" "Literature and history at an elementary school in my town in Virginia." "And how does one go from teaching Emerson to dusting Boston libraries?" The question was direct but devoid of malice. Eleanor hesitated. "Life sometimes takes unexpected turns, ma'am." Vivian studied her for a long moment. "You know, my son Gideon always says that the most interesting people are those with stories they don't tell." She took a book from the shelf. "This is one of my favorites. Perhaps you'll like it." She handed her an elegant edition of The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. "We can't behave like people in novels, though, can we?" quoted Eleanor, remembering the famous line from the novel. Vivian's eyes sparkled with recognition. "Exactly. Sometimes I wonder if in this house the opposite isn't happening. Everything constantly changes, so that nothing can truly transform." With a slight nod of her head, she moved away toward the door. "Tea is served at 4 in the Winter Garden. I would like it if you would join me occasionally." That afternoon, while arranging some documents in Harrison's office, Eleanor noticed a photograph on the desk. A much younger Vivian, with a boy of about 10 and a surprisingly smiling Harrison. They looked happy, as if they belonged to a parallel universe compared to the family that now inhabited the manor. Next to the photo, an orderly row of medicine bottles. Eleanor couldn't help but notice the names. Medications for controlling hypertension, but also for a neurological condition. Suddenly, Harrison's fits of anger acquired a new dimension. That same day, later, as she was crossing the corridor leading to the kitchens, she heard a male voice coming from the study. She stopped, recognizing Harrison's angry tone. "It's unacceptable, Gideon. Those contracts must be found." "Father, we've looked everywhere." "The original documents have disappeared, and without them, we risk losing the entire German commission. Do you know what that means? Millions of dollars, and the family's reputation." "I know, Father, but perhaps you should consider renegotiating with—" "Negotiate? The Thornfields never negotiate from positions of weakness, never." Eleanor moved away silently, but that conversation imprinted itself in her mind. That night, in the silence of her room, She thought about all the fragments of that strange family she was slowly collecting. There was much more than what appeared on the surface. The most eloquent silences, she thought, are those that hide truths that no one has the courage to face. Rain beat insistently against the windows of the manor, creating a hypnotic rhythm that accompanied Eleanor as she finished organizing the highest shelves of the library. It was Sunday afternoon, and most of the staff had the day off. She had preferred to stay, taking advantage of the quiet to complete some work without interruptions. Standing on a wooden ladder, she was repositioning some volumes when her hand hit something behind a row of encyclopedias. Intrigued, she extended her arm and extracted a worn leather folder, hidden like a secret among the dust and history. She opened it cautiously and immediately realized what she had found: the German contracts she had heard Harrison and his son discussing. Documents worth millions of dollars, apparently lost, had simply been filed in the wrong place. She was still examining the papers when she heard the library door open. She turned abruptly, finding herself face to face with Gideon Thornfield. Tall like his father, but with his mother's kind eyes, he wore casual clothes that contrasted with the formal elegance that characterized Harrison. "Excuse me," he said, surprised to find her there. "I didn't think anyone would be here." Eleanor quickly descended the ladder, holding the folder. "Mr. Thornfield, I believe I've found something you've been looking for." Gideon's eyes widened when he recognized the documents. "The German contracts? Where did you find them?" "They were hidden behind the 18th century encyclopedias." She handed him the folder. "From what I understand, they're important." Gideon quickly leafed through the documents, an expression of disbelief and relief on his face. "Important is an understatement. You've just saved a $12 million deal and our company's reputation." He looked at her with new curiosity. Most people would have kept such a discovery to themselves, using it as leverage. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "For what purpose would I have done that? My father hasn't exactly been kind to you. Don't confuse dignity with revenge, Mr. Thornfield. I'm not here to play chess with your family. I'm here to do my job." Gideon studied her intently. "You know, my mother was right about you." "Your mother?" "She told me you're different. That you have a—" he searched for the right word— "an integrity that has been missing from this house for a long time." Eleanor didn't know how to respond, but she was saved by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Harrison entered the library, his face tense and tired. He stopped upon seeing his son and the housekeeper together. "What's happening here?" he asked, his gaze suspicious. Gideon quickly approached his father. "Mrs. Blackwood has found the German contracts. They were in the library, misfiled." Harrison took the documents with hands that Eleanor noticed were slightly trembling. He examined them in silence, then looked up at her. "Did you read them?" he asked, his voice suddenly controlled. "No, sir. I only recognized that they were the documents you were discussing the other day." A strange expression crossed the man's face, something halfway between relief and discomfort. "Good," he said finally. "This proves that at least someone in this house knows how to do their job." He turned to his son. "Prepare everything for the trip to Berlin. We'll leave tomorrow morning." As the two men left the room, immersed in a technical conversation about the details of the agreement, Eleanor remained alone in the library. A thought struck her. Harrison hadn't thanked her, but neither had he insulted her. For him, it represented a step forward. That evening, returning to her room, she found an envelope on her desk. Inside, a substantial bonus and a note signed by Gideon. "For your discretion and competence. Thank you." Eleanor smiled, thinking about how that money would be useful for her son's medical expenses. Perhaps, after all, fate had guided her to the right place. But as she prepared for the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about those documents, something in Harrison's eyes when he had asked if she had read them, as if those contracts contained more than simple business agreements. Sometimes, she reflected, looking at the lights of Boston from her window, the biggest secrets hide in plain sight, protected not by locks, but by our reluctance to see beyond the surface. The Boston autumn tinged Thornfield Manor's gardens with gold and crimson. 2 months had passed since the discovery of the German contracts, and a fragile truce seemed to have been established between Eleanor and Harrison. He hadn't stopped being demanding, but his outbursts had attenuated, especially in her presence. That October morning, as Eleanor supervised the preparations for an important reception that would be held that evening, she heard a fragile sob coming from the small drawing room, Approaching silently, she saw Vivian seated on the sofa, a crumpled letter in her hands and tears marking her pale face. "Ma'am," Eleanor said gently, "can I help you?" Vivian started, quickly drying her tears. "Oh, Eleanor, I didn't hear you. I apologize for the intrusion. Can I bring you something? Tea, perhaps?" The woman hesitated, then nodded weakly. "Yes, thank you. Tea would be perfect." When Eleanor returned with the tray, she found Vivian looking out the window, lost in her thoughts. She sat beside her, pouring tea into fine porcelain cups. "You prepare tea exactly as I like it," observed Vivian, "strong but with a touch of honey instead of sugar." "I noticed how you take it during our afternoons in the library," replied Eleanor. A comfortable silence fell between them until Vivian spoke again. "My sister has died," she said suddenly. "She was the last person from my family. Now I'm truly alone. I'm so very sorry, ma'am. We hadn't seen each other for years. Harrison never appreciated her. He said she was inappropriate for our social position." A bitter smile curled her lips. In reality, she was the only one who dared to tell him the truth, just like you, Eleanor. Eleanor remained silent, feeling that Vivian needed to speak more than to listen. "You know," continued the woman, "I wasn't always so invisible. I once wrote poetry, painted. I dreamed of opening a small art gallery in Charleston, my hometown." She sighed. "Then I met Harrison. He was so charismatic, so self-assured. He promised me the world. And instead, he gave me a golden cage. At first I didn't notice. Then slowly he began to criticize my friendships, my interests. Not suitable for our status, he would say. One by one, my passions became inappropriate." She took a sip of tea. "And then the illness came." "The illness?" asked Eleanor, remembering the medications on Harrison's desk. "A degenerative neurological condition. It affects his emotional control, his short-term memory. Sometimes he isn't even aware of how he treats people." Vivian looked at her intensely. "I'm not justifying him, but perhaps it helps to understand." At that moment, the drawing-room door burst open and Harrison entered, his face dark with anger. "Vivian, I've been looking for you everywhere. The guests will arrive in 3 hours and you're here having tea." He stopped, seeing Eleanor. "And what are you doing here? Don't you have work to supervise?" Before Eleanor could respond, Vivian rose with unexpected grace. "Eleanor was kindly keeping me company while I process the grief for my sister, Harrison. News that you have evidently forgotten, despite my telling you this morning." Harrison's face contorted in a confused expression, then an embarrassed one. "Your sister, of course. I'm sorry, Vivian. With all this work, He broke off, then turned to Eleanor. "I apologize for my tone, Mrs. Blackwood. Thank you for assisting my wife." Eleanor nodded, surprised by this rare moment of humility. "Tonight's reception is very important," he continued, finding his usual authoritarian tone. "There will be publishing executives from all over Europe. I want everything to be impeccable." "It will be, sir," assured Eleanor, rising. "With your permission, I'll return to the preparations." As she left, she heard Vivian say to her husband, "You should trust people more, Harrison, especially those who tell you the truth, even when you don't want to hear it." That evening, the reception was a success. The European publishing elite moved among the halls, illuminated by hundreds of candles, admiring the restored frescoes and antique furniture. Eleanor discreetly supervised the service, ensuring that everything proceeded perfectly. It was during a moment of relative calm that she noticed Gideon in a corner, engaged in a tense conversation with a distinguished-looking man. She approached to ask if more champagne was needed and caught fragments of their discussion. "You've seen the numbers, Nathaniel. Something doesn't add up," Gideon was saying. "Your father has always personally managed that branch," replied the other man. "If we start asking questions, he might interpret it as a lack of trust. This isn't about trust, but transparency. The German company is asking for explanations we can't give." Noticing Eleanor's presence, both men interrupted their conversation. Gideon smiled at her, introducing his interlocutor. "Mrs. Blackwood, let me introduce Nathaniel Whitaker, our financial director and my dear friend. Nathaniel, this is Mrs. Blackwood, our new housekeeper and savior of the German contracts." The man shook her hand, studying her carefully. "Ah, the famous Mrs. Blackwood. Gideon has told me a lot about you." I hope positive things, she replied with a polite smile. Let's say that anyone who manages to stand up to Harrison Thornfield deserves my admiration, said Nathaniel with a slight smile. Later, as Eleanor checked that everything was in order for dessert, she found herself reflecting on the conversation she had overheard. Was there something in the German contracts that disturbed Gideon, something that Harrison was keeping hidden? She was crossing the corridor when she heard a thud, followed by a groan of pain coming from Harrison's study. Concerned, she knocked lightly and, receiving no response, opened the door. Harrison was slumped in his armchair, his face pale and contorted with pain, a hand pressed to his chest. On the floor, an overturned bottle of medication. "Sir!" exclaimed Eleanor, rushing toward him. "Are you ill? Should I call a doctor?" "No," he managed to say through clenched teeth. "No, doctor, just my medication. In the desk, the top drawer." Eleanor hurried to open the indicated drawer, finding another bottle of pills. She handed him one along with a glass of water that she filled from the carafe on the small table. As he swallowed the medicine, she noticed some documents scattered on the desk. Among them, a financial report with the letterhead of the German branch, and numbers circled in red. Harrison followed her gaze and, with surprising rapidity despite his condition, gathered the documents. "It's nothing," he said, his voice already steadier. "Just business matters." "Of course, sir. It's none of my business." She hesitated. "Do you feel better? Can I do anything else?" He looked at her, and for a moment Eleanor saw something in his eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps, or perhaps gratitude. "No, thank you. I'm already feeling better." He paused. "Please don't mention this episode to anyone. Neither to my wife nor to my son." "As you wish, sir." As she left the study, Eleanor realized that Thornfield Manor, like its owner, hid increasingly evident cracks behind its imposing facade. The most difficult truths to face, she thought, are those that threaten the foundations on which we have built our lives. Dry leaves danced in the wind as Eleanor walked along Newbury Street, the beating heart of Boston fashion. It was her first free afternoon in weeks, and although she could have rested, she had chosen to run an important errand for Vivienne, retrieving a family jewel from repair. The shop was one of those ancient Boston ateliers where time seemed to have stopped. Dark wood, discreet showcases, and an atmosphere of whispered exclusivity. While she waited for the jeweler to complete the paperwork, Eleanor distractedly observed through the window and froze. Across the street, in an elegant cafe, sat Harrison and a man she had never seen. Their conversation seemed tense, their faces contracted in hard expressions. She wouldn't have given weight to the matter, if not for the gesture she saw. The unknown man discreetly pushed an envelope toward Harrison, who took it with visibly trembling hands, not from illness this time, but from what seemed like fear. "Mrs. Blackwood, your package is ready." The jeweler's voice brought her back to reality. She thanked him and left, deciding to cross the street and casually pass near the cafe. As she approached, she could catch fragments of the conversation. "The last payment, Thornfield. After this, our agreement is concluded. How can I be sure? What guarantees that there won't be more demands?" Harrison's voice was controlled but tense. "My word as a gentleman," replied the other with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "and the fact that you now have nothing more that interests me." At that moment, Harrison looked up and saw Eleanor. A flash of panic crossed his face. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, quickly regaining his composure. "What a coincidence." "Good afternoon, sir," she replied naturally. "I was picking up Mrs. Thornfield's pendant. I didn't mean to disturb." The unknown man studied her with predatory curiosity. "And who might this charming lady be, Harrison?" "Our housekeeper," he replied curtly. "Mrs. Blackwood, let me introduce Mr. Victor Mercer, an old acquaintance." "Pleased to meet you," said Eleanor with a polite but cautious smile. There was something deeply disturbing about that man. "The pleasure is all mine," replied Mercer, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips in an antiquated gesture that gave her chills. "Harrison, you never told me you had such a distinguished housekeeper." "Mrs. Blackwood is very competent and discreet," emphasized Harrison, with particular emphasis on the last word. "I see," smiled Mercer. "Discretion is a rare virtue these days." "If you'll excuse me," said Eleanor, taking back her hand, "I must return to the manor to deliver the jewel to Mrs. Thornfield." "Of course," replied Harrison. "I've finished here as well." He stood up, addressing Mercer with a rigid nod of his head. "As you said, our agreement is concluded." As they walked together toward the chauffeur-driven car waiting a short distance away, a tense silence enveloped them both. It was Harrison who broke it. "How much did you hear?" he asked directly. Eleanor looked him in the eyes. "Enough to understand that that man is blackmailing you, sir." Harrison sighed, suddenly appearing older and more tired. "That man possesses information that could destroy everything I've built. Information linked to the German contracts," she ventured. His surprised look gave her confirmation. "How do you—" "I have eyes to see and ears to hear, sir, and I know how to recognize when something doesn't add up." They reached the car in silence. The chauffeur opened the doors, and to Eleanor's surprise, Harrison motioned for her to enter. "I'll take you back to the manor," he said. "We have some things to discuss." During the journey, Harrison told her a story she never would have imagined. Years earlier, desperate to save the family business from bankruptcy, he had falsified some documents to obtain a crucial loan. Victor Mercer, at the time a bank employee with access to confidential dossiers, had discovered the irregularity but, instead of reporting him, had proposed an agreement, his silence in exchange for a percentage of the German deals. "For years I've paid," concluded Harrison, "watching part of my profits go into his pockets. Today was supposed to be the last payment." "Do you really believe he'll keep his word?" asked Eleanor. "No," admitted Harrison. "But what can I do? If everything came to light, I would lose not only the company but also my family's reputation. Vivian couldn't bear it. And Gideon, he who has always believed in my integrity." For the first time, Eleanor saw beyond the facade of the ruthless businessman. She saw a frightened man trapped in the consequences of his past choices. "Sir," she said finally, "I think you should talk to your son." "Impossible. Gideon is a brilliant lawyer, and more importantly, he is your son. He deserves to know the truth before he discovers it in another way." Harrison looked at her with a new expression, respect perhaps. "You're not afraid to tell me what you think, are you, Eleanor? I've learned that the truth, however painful, is always less dangerous than secrets." When they arrived at the manor, he paused before getting out of the car. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for the advice, but for not judging." That evening, as Eleanor arranged the linens in her room's wardrobe, she heard a gentle knock at the door. It was Gideon. "May I come in for a moment?" he asked, his expression serious. "Of course," she replied, stepping aside. "My father has told me everything," he said without preamble, "about the falsified documents, the blackmail, Mercer. He told me it was thanks to you that he found the courage to talk to me." "I only suggested what seemed right." Gideon shook his head, incredulous. "You're extraordinary, Eleanor. You arrived in this house only a few months ago, yet you've managed to do what no one had ever done. Break down the walls that my father has built around himself his entire life." "Sometimes it's easier to open up to a stranger," she observed. "There's no weight of expectations, of judgment accumulated over the years." "Perhaps," he conceded, "or perhaps it's simply you, with your integrity, that cannot be bought or intimidated." He smiled at her. "I have a plan to definitively free ourselves from Mercer, without legal risks for my father. But I'll need your help." "My help? In what way?" "You're the only witness to today's meeting. The only person, besides me and my father, who knows about the envelope and the veiled threats. You could be fundamental." Eleanor hesitated. She had promised herself, arriving in Boston, to keep a low profile, to do her job and nothing more. Now she found herself involved in a situation that could have unpredictable consequences. "You don't have to decide right away," said Gideon, noticing her hesitation. "Think about it." That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. Outside her window, Boston shone with artificial lights that couldn't obscure the glimmer of the stars. She thought of her son Oliver, of the life she had left in Virginia, of the woman she had been and the one she was becoming in this new Boston reality. Sometimes, she reflected, looking at the night sky, the most difficult choices aren't between right and wrong, but between what is safe and what is necessary. The following morning, Eleanor woke with a clarity that only sleepless nights can gift. She had made her decision. She would help the Thornfield family free themselves from Mercer, not just for Harrison or Gideon, but because she felt that that manor and the people who inhabited it had become, in some unexpected way, part of her life. Coming down the stairs, she found the house unusually silent. In the kitchen, Martha explained that Harrison and Gideon had left at dawn, while Vivian was still in her rooms. "There's a strange atmosphere today," commented the cook, energetically kneading the dough for lunch. "As if everyone were holding their breath. Sometimes silence precedes great changes," replied Eleanor, helping her roll out the dough. "You know something we don't you?" asked Martha, with an astute smile. "Don't worry, I'm not curious, but whatever is happening, I'm happy that you're here to face it with them." Later, Eleanor went up to bring tea to Vivian. She found her seated at her desk, intent on writing in a small, leather-bound notebook. "Your tea, ma'am," announced Eleanor, gently placing the tray. "Thank you, dear." Vivian closed the notebook with a natural gesture. "You know, I'm writing again. Poetry, mostly. Small fragments of thoughts." "That's wonderful," smiled Eleanor, genuinely happy for her. "It's thanks to you in a way," continued Vivian, pouring herself tea. "Seeing someone defend their dignity with such grace, it made me remember the woman I was before becoming just Harrison Thornfield's wife." "It's never too late to find parts of yourself that you thought were lost," observed Eleanor. Vivian studied her with a penetrating gaze. "My husband and my son are plotting something important." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor still felt the need to respond. "They're trying to solve a problem that has afflicted the family for a long time." "I see." Vivian sipped her tea. "And you're involved, in a way." "Good," said the woman simply. "If there's someone I trust to protect this family, even from itself, it's you, Eleanor." That afternoon, while Eleanor was tidying the library, she received a call from Gideon. "We need you," he said without preamble. "Now, can you join us at the address I'll send you via message? The driver is already ready." An hour later, Eleanor found herself in an elegant law office in downtown Boston. Gideon welcomed her in the lobby lined with marble and dark wood. "Thank you for coming," he said, guiding her through silent corridors. "My father is with my partner, finalizing some documents." "Explain to me what's happening," asked Eleanor. "We've found evidence that Mercer has used the same blackmail scheme with other businessmen. Documents, recordings, testimonies. We've built a solid case against him." Gideon looked at her intently. "But we need your testimony to complete the picture. You saw the envelope exchange with your own eyes, you heard his words. And what will happen to your father, to his past irregularities? We've found a way to address that too. A partial admission of some administrative imprecisions, a substantial donation to a charity, and the promise of total transparency from now on." He hesitated. "It's not perfect, but it's the best we can do without destroying everything." They entered a conference room where Harrison sat next to a distinguished-looking man. Documents and photographs were scattered on the table. "Mrs. Blackwood," greeted Harrison, rising. There was a new energy in his movements, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Let me introduce Attorney Wesley Hammond, Gideon's partner." After the introductions and a brief recap of the situation, Attorney Hammond addressed Eleanor. "Mrs. Blackwood, we would need your detailed statement about what you saw and heard yesterday. Every detail could be important." Eleanor nodded and began to recount with precision and calm the meeting at the cafe. As she spoke, she noticed the attorney taking furious notes and Harrison nodding in confirmation. "There's a detail that might be useful," she added at the end. "When Mr. Mercer took my hand, I noticed a faded tattoo on his wrist, a series of numbers, like a date." Attorney Hammond's eyes lit up. "This is extremely interesting. It might correspond to information we have about his previous involvement in questionable activities." After almost 2 hours of questions and clarifications, Eleanor signed her official statement. As she did so, a thought struck her. "What happens now?" "We'll present everything to the FBI," explained Gideon. "With the evidence collected, Mercer will face very serious charges. As for us, we'll begin a new chapter." On the way back, seated next to Harrison in the luxury car, Eleanor observed the profile of the man against the urban panorama of Boston. Was he still the same severe businessman who had welcomed her months earlier with shouts and humiliations? "So you surprised me today," she said finally, breaking the silence. "In what way?" he asked, turning to look at her. "You chose the more difficult path, facing the consequences instead of continuing to hide." Harrison smiled weakly. "It wasn't a completely altruistic choice, believe me. But yes, it was time to stop living in fear." He paused. You know, when I hired you, I thought you would last a week. No one dares to contradict me." "Evidently you needed someone who would," replied Eleanor with a small smile. "Evidently." He looked out the window. "My son told me you were a teacher before." "Yes, in elementary school. I taught for 15 years. Why did you stop?" Eleanor hesitated. It was a question she had never fully answered, not even with Vivian. "My son Oliver had a serious accident 2 years ago. He needs expensive care, and a teacher's salary wasn't enough. I looked for better paying jobs, and here I am." Harrison studied her with an expression she had never seen on him before. Compassion, perhaps. "Is that why you accept my outbursts? To keep this job?" "No," she replied firmly. "I don't accept your outbursts. I confront them when necessary, but I stay because, despite everything, I believe that in this house there is more than what appears on the surface. Something worth saving." When they arrived at the manor, they found Vivian waiting for them in the entrance hall with a worried expression. "Is everything all right?" she asked, searching her husband's eyes for the answer. Harrison approached her and, with a gesture that surprised everyone, took her hands. "Yes, dear, and soon it will be even better." He turned to Eleanor. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood, for everything." That evening, alone in her room, Eleanor wrote a long letter to her son Oliver. She told him about the manor, about the Thornfield family, about the transformation she was witnessing. She promised him that soon he would have the best possible care, and that perhaps one day not too far away they could be together again. As she sealed the envelope, she felt a weight lift from her heart. The decision to help the Thornfields had also been a decision to help herself, to allow herself to belong, to matter, to make a difference. The choices we make in moments of crisis, she thought, looking at the letter, reveal not only who we are, but who we can become. December wrapped Boston in a mantle of fog and snow, transforming the city into an ethereal landscape where Christmas lights shone like stars in a milky universe. Thornfield Manor was preparing to host the traditional Christmas reception, an event that brought together the industrial and political elite of New England. For Eleanor, the last few weeks had been a whirlwind of activity. With the arrest of Victor Mercer, widely reported in financial newspapers as part of an anti-corruption operation, the Thornfield family was attempting to rebuild its public image. Harrison had announced a company restructuring in the name of transparency, with Gideon assuming a more prominent role in business management. That morning, while supervising the decoration of the large Christmas tree in the entrance hall, Eleanor received a phone call that would change everything. "Hello," she answered, moving away from the bustle. "Mrs. Blackwood?" The voice on the other end was that of Dr. Richards, the doctor who was treating her son in Richmond. "I have important news regarding Oliver." Eleanor's heart stopped. "What happened? Is he all right?" Yes, don't worry. Actually, I have good news. We've reviewed his case with a specialist from Johns Hopkins, and we believe there's a procedure that could significantly improve his condition. It's an experimental intervention, but the preliminary results are very promising." "That's wonderful," whispered Eleanor, feeling tears in her eyes. "When could he be operated on?" There was a pause. "Well, this is the complicated part. There's an opening in 2 weeks, but—" The doctor hesitated. "The cost is considerable, and insurance covers only a minimal part, as it's an experimental procedure." Eleanor felt the weight of reality crash back down on her. The savings she had accumulated in the months at Thornfield Manor were sufficient for regular therapies, but not for a specialized intervention. "I understand," she said finally. "How much time do we have to decide?" "The opening is in 2 weeks, but if we don't take it, the next availability would be in spring." After closing the call, Eleanor remained motionless, her gaze lost in emptiness. The possibility of a significant improvement for Oliver was there, within reach yet unreachable. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" Vivian's voice roused her from her thoughts. The lady, elegant in a burgundy dress, was looking at her with concern. "Yes, ma'am, just news from home." Vivian studied her carefully. "It doesn't seem like good news from your face." Eleanor hesitated, then decided to confide in her. She told her about Oliver, about the accident, about his condition, and now about this new possibility. "But the cost," she concluded, shaking her head. Vivian took her hands. "We must talk to Harrison. The Thornfield Foundation could—" "No," interrupted Eleanor firmly. "Thank you, but I can't accept. I don't want charity." "It wouldn't be charity, but—" "Excuse me, ma'am, but I must get back to work. We still have much to do for the reception." In the following days, Eleanor worked with a feverish intensity, as if physical activity could distance her from distressing thoughts. She organized, cleaned, supervised, staying awake until late at night to ensure that every detail was perfect. The evening of the reception arrived, bringing with it a snowstorm that made Boston even more magical and mysterious. Guests began to arrive, men in impeccable tuxedos, women wrapped in furs and sparkling jewels. The atmosphere was electric, full of laughter, conversations, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Eleanor moved discreetly among the guests, ensuring that everything proceeded smoothly. It was during one of these moments that she noticed Harrison in a corner, engaged in a tense conversation with an austere-looking man. "Ridiculous, Thornfield," the man was saying. "After the Mercer scandal, do you really think anyone still trusts doing business with you?" "The Mercer scandal showed that I was a victim of extortion, Harrington," replied Harrison, maintaining his calm. "And that I had the courage to report it." "After years of payments," retorted the other. "No, I'm afraid the days of Thornfield Publishing are over. The German consortium is already evaluating other options." Eleanor saw Harrison's face pale slightly. The German consortium was their biggest client, and losing it would mean financial disaster. Later, while serving canapes in another hall, she heard fragments of conversation between Gideon and Nathaniel Whitaker. "The shares are plummeting," whispered Nathaniel. "If the consortium withdraws, we risk collapse." "We can't allow it," replied Gideon. "Not after everything we've done to fix things." The evening proceeded, but Eleanor could perceive the growing tension beneath the surface of smiles and pleasantries. Vivienne seemed particularly agitated, moving from one group to another with a forced smile. It was around midnight that the situation deteriorated. Eleanor was crossing the entrance hall when she heard a thud followed by alarmed exclamations coming from the library. Running toward the noise, she found Harrison slumped in an armchair, his face pale and sweaty, surrounded by concerned guests. "I'm calling an ambulance," someone said. "No," exclaimed Harrison weakly. "I'm fine. It's just fatigue." Eleanor made her way through the crowd. "Excuse me," she said with authority. "Let him breathe." She knelt beside him, noticing the signs she now knew well: the trembling hand, the labored breathing, the slightly confused gaze. "Your medication, sir," she whispered. "Where is it?" "Study. Drawer," he murmured. Eleanor rose. "Mr. Thornfield just needs to rest," she announced to the guests. "Please continue to enjoy the evening." Then, turning to Gideon, who had just arrived, "Your father needs his medication." "It's in the drawer of his study." While Gideon ran to retrieve the medicine, Eleanor and Nathaniel helped Harrison reach a more private sofa. The guests, reassured but still curious, slowly returned to their conversations, though the atmosphere of the party was now compromised. "Thank you," whispered Harrison when Gideon returned with the medication. He took it with a trembling hand, swallowing it with a sip of water. "I'm sorry for the spectacle." "Don't worry about that now," Eleanor reassured him. "You need to rest." "No," he insisted, trying to stand up. "I need to talk to Harrington, convince him that the consortium can't withdraw." "Father," intervened Gideon firmly, "you're in no condition." "If I don't do it, we'll lose everything," exclaimed Harrison, his voice betraying desperation. "The company, the reputation, the jobs of hundreds of people." Eleanor looked at the man she had feared and respected, now reduced to a fragile version of himself. In that moment, she realized something fundamental. Despite everything, Harrison Thornfield deeply loved what he had built, not just for himself, but for all those who depended on him. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "there's another way." All eyes turned to her. "What do you mean?" asked Gideon. "Mr. Harrington no longer trusts you because of the Mercer scandal. But if he saw that you've truly changed the way you do business, that transparency isn't just a word." She stopped, uncertain whether to continue. "Go on," encouraged Harrison. "If you showed him the new contracts, the reforms you've implemented, if you allowed him to see that Thornfield Publishing is no longer the company that paid Mercer, but a renewed reality, guided by ethical principles." Gideon and Nathaniel exchanged a glance. "It could work," said Nathaniel slowly. "Harrington is a man of principles. If he saw that we're sincere in our renewal—" "But who could convince him?" asked Gideon. "He doesn't trust us, and he has every reason." There was a moment of silence. Then Harrison looked at Eleanor. "You," he said simply. Me? She exclaimed, surprised. Yes, you're the only one in this house whom Harrington doesn't associate with the old way of doing business. You were the one who found the courage to confront me when no one else dared. You were the one who convinced me to report Mercer. Harrison looked at her intently. If there's someone capable of speaking of integrity and being believed, it's you, Eleanor. The proposal was crazy, and yet it made sense. Eleanor thought of Oliver, of the operation she couldn't afford, of the uncertain future. If Thornfield Publishing failed, her job would disappear too. All right, she said finally. I'll talk to him. They found Harrington in the winter garden, intent on smoking a cigar in solitude. When Eleanor approached, the man looked at her with curiosity. Mr. Harrington, she began, my name is Eleanor Blackwood. I'm the housekeeper of Thornfield Manor. And what can I do for you, Mrs. Blackwood? He asked with a courteous but detached smile. Actually, I'm the one who could do something for you, save you from a serious commercial error. The man's smile vanished, replaced by a wary expression. Continue. For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor spoke with passion and sincerity. She recounted her experience at Thornfield Manor, the changes she had seen, Harrison's genuine transformation. She explained the new company policies, the restructuring, the commitment to ethical management. I'm not a business expert, she concluded, but I know how to recognize authenticity, and I assure you that the change in this family is real. Harrington studied her in silence, then shook his head with an admiring smile. You know, Mrs. Blackwood, in 30 years of career, it's the first time a housekeeper has convinced me to reconsider a multi-million-dollar deal. So, I've convinced you? Let's say I'm willing to listen to what Harrison and his son have to propose, tomorrow, in my office, with concrete documents. When Eleanor reported the conversation to Harrison, the man looked at her with an expression she had never seen on him, pure and sincere gratitude. I owe you a lot, Eleanor, he said simply. That night, as the last guests left and the manor returned to silence, Eleanor found herself alone in the library. The snowstorm outside had intensified, creating a white and silent world beyond the windows. She looked at her reflection in an antique mirror and wondered who she had become in those months. No longer just a teacher, not just a housekeeper, something more complex, more faceted. The most difficult storms to weather, she thought, aren't those that rage outside, but those that transform us within. The week following the Christmas reception proved to be one of the most difficult in Eleanor's life. The meeting between Harrison, Gideon, and Mr. Harrington had gone well. The German consortium had agreed to continue the collaboration with Thornfield Publishing on the condition that new transparency protocols would be implemented. The company crisis seemed averted, but while the Thornfield family found a new equilibrium, Eleanor's personal life was plunging into uncertainty. Dr. Richards had called her back. The window for Oliver's operation was closing rapidly, and without a substantial advance, they would lose the opportunity. On a cold mid-December morning, Eleanor sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the letter she had just finished writing. It was addressed to her sister in Virginia, asking her to sell the small family oak grove, the last tangible link to her parents, the last thing she had left besides memories. It wasn't enough, she knew, but it was a start. With those dollars and her savings, perhaps she could convince the hospital to accept a payment plan for the rest. A light knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said, quickly hiding the letter under a book. Vivian entered, elegant as always in a pearl-grey dress, but with an unusually determined expression on her face. "Good morning, Eleanor. May I speak with you for a moment?" "Certainly, ma'am." Eleanor stood, indicating the only chair in the room, while she remained standing. "No, please sit. What I have to say will take a little time." Vivian closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed, next to where Eleanor had been sitting. The gesture, so informal, so unexpected, left Eleanor momentarily speechless. "Since you arrived in this house," Vivian began, "everything has changed. You've restored dignity not only to the staff, but to all of us. You've reminded my husband what it means to act with integrity. You've given my son a model of courage, and to me—" She smiled sweetly. "To me, you've given back my voice." "Ma'am, Let me finish, please." Vivian took a deep breath. "I know about your son. I know about the operation you can't afford." Eleanor paled. "How?" "I spoke with Harrison after the reception. He did some research. Seeing Eleanor's expression, she quickly added, "Don't be angry. He was concerned about you." "He had no right," said Eleanor, her voice tense. "No, probably not, but he did it with good intentions." Vivian extracted an envelope from the pocket of her dress. "We want to help you, Eleanor. The Thornfield Foundation will cover all the expenses of your son's operation." Eleanor stared at the envelope, a whirlwind of emotions crossing her face. Gratitude, wounded pride, hope, embarrassment. "I can't accept," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Why not?" It wouldn't be appropriate. I'm your employee." Vivian shook her head with a sad smile. "After all this time, you still don't understand. You're not just an employee, Eleanor. You're part of this family now." The word struck Eleanor like a sudden wave. Family, a word that had meant only her and Oliver for so long. "Besides," continued Vivian, "it's not charity, it's an investment." An investment? Harrison and Gideon are creating a new educational division within the foundation. Programs for schools' scholarships, support for innovative projects. They would like you to direct it once your son is better. Eleanor was left speechless, completely overwhelmed. "You don't have to decide right away," Vivian reassured her, placing the envelope on the bedside table. "Think about it. But know that this isn't a gift. It's a recognition of your value. And perhaps in part, also a reparation for how we welcomed you at the beginning." After Vivian had left, Eleanor remained motionless, staring at the envelope as if it could contain not only her son's salvation, but also a completely new direction for her life. That evening, when she finally found the courage to open it, she discovered not only a check for the entire amount of the operation, but also a letter signed by Harrison, Vivian, and Gideon, formally offering her the position of Director of the Educational Division of the Thornfield Foundation, with a salary that was triple her current one. The world seemed to have turned upside down, from teacher to housekeeper to foundation executive, from a desperate single mother to a woman with a promising future, from stranger to family. But just when everything seemed to be resolving miraculously, life reminded her of its unpredictability. The following morning, she received a call that froze the blood in her veins. "Mrs. Blackwood?" Her sister's voice was broken by tears. "It's Oliver. He's had a sudden deterioration. He's in intensive care." The world stopped. Eleanor felt herself falling into a bottomless abyss. The next words arrived as if through a tunnel. "The doctors say the operation can't wait any longer. It's a matter of days, not weeks." With trembling hands, Eleanor grabbed the Thornfields' check. Now it was no longer a question of pride or appropriateness. It was a matter of life or death. In a state of semi-consciousness, she found herself knocking at the door of Harrison's study. When she entered, he looked at her and immediately understood that something was wrong. "Eleanor? What happened?" "I have to leave," she said, her voice strangely calm despite the inner chaos. "Immediately. My son has worsened. He needs the operation now." Harrison stood up, picking up the phone. "I'll call my pilot. The private jet can take you to Richmond in less than an hour." "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. Go to your son. That's all that matters now." An hour later, Eleanor found herself on the Thornfields' private jet, flying toward Virginia, toward Oliver. The winter landscape below her seemed like a different, distant, unreal world. Looking out the window, she thought about how much her life had changed in a few months, how much she herself had changed. She was no longer the frightened and desperate woman who had accepted a job as a housekeeper in a Boston manor. She was stronger now, more determined. But as the plane crossed the clouds, a primal fear gripped her. What if it was too late? If all the money in the world couldn't save her son? The deepest abysses, she thought with anguish, are those that open up just when we believe we've finally reached solid ground. The Richmond hospital welcomed Eleanor with its familiar smell of disinfectant and the constant hum of machinery. For the past 3 days, she had lived in that aseptic room, sleeping on an uncomfortable armchair next to Oliver's bed, leaving only for brief breaks. Dr. Werner, the Johns Hopkins specialist who had arrived urgently thanks to the Thornfields' intervention, had performed the operation the same day she arrived. 7 hours of intervention that had seemed an eternity. "We've done everything possible," he had said afterward, with his German accent and a tired but confident look. "Now we have to wait for him to wake up." And so Eleanor waited, watching the pale face of her son, so similar to hers yet with those traits that reminded her of his father, a man who had abandoned them years earlier, when Oliver was just a child. She had just dozed off when she felt a slight movement. She opened her eyes with a start and saw Oliver looking at her, his eyes confused but alert. "Mom," he whispered with a hoarse voice. "I'm here, sweetheart," she replied, squeezing his hand, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here." Dr. Werner, called immediately, declared himself cautiously optimistic after examining Oliver. "The first signs are encouraging," he said, "but we still have a long road ahead." In the following days, as Oliver showed slow but steady improvements, Eleanor maintained only brief contacts with Thornfield Manor. Gideon called daily to check in, assuring her that everything was proceeding well and that she shouldn't worry about anything except her son's health. It was a week after the operation, while she was seated by the window of the hospital room reading aloud to Oliver, that she heard a knock at the door. To her immense surprise, when she said, "Come in," she saw Vivian enter, followed by a hesitant Harrison. "Ma'am, sir," she exclaimed, rising abruptly. "I wasn't expecting—" "We hoped not to disturb," said Vivian with a gentle smile, approaching the bed. "We wanted to see how Oliver was doing and bring you this." She indicated a large basket that Harrison awkwardly held in his hands, filled with books, chocolate, and other small comforts. "It's very kind of you," said Eleanor, still stunned by their presence. Oliver looked at the visitors with curiosity. "Are you my mum's boss?" he asked directly to Harrison. The man seemed momentarily disconcerted by the direct question, then smiled, a genuine smile that Eleanor had rarely seen. "In theory, yes. But in practice, I think it's more often she who tells me what to do." Oliver laughed, then stopped with a grimace of pain. "Yes, Mum is good at giving orders." The visit lasted half an hour, during which Eleanor observed with wonder the interaction between the Thornfields and her son. Harrison, initially awkward, relaxed when he discovered that Oliver shared his interest in American history. Vivian brought a book of poetry that she had written and illustrated personally, promising to teach him how to paint when he was better. When it was time to leave, Vivian hugged Eleanor. "We'll be back soon," she promised. "And remember, when the time comes, the educational division is waiting for you." Harrison approached Oliver's bed. "Young man," he said with unexpected gentleness, "your mother is an extraordinary woman, one of the most courageous people I've ever known. Take care of her, as she takes care of you." After they had left, Oliver looked at his mother with eyes full of curiosity. "You never really told me what you do in that big manor," he said, "just that you're the housekeeper." Eleanor smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It's a long and complicated story, sweetheart. I have time," he replied, indicating the machines to which he was still connected, "and I like complicated stories." So Eleanor began to recount from the beginning, her arrival at the manor, the first confrontation with Harrison, the secret she had discovered, the gradual transformation of the family. As she spoke, she realized that she was telling not just a story of work, but a story of redemption, of second chances, of unexpected connections. "So you won't be a housekeeper anymore?" asked Oliver when she had finished. "No, I don't think so. If I accept their offer, I'll direct an educational foundation. I could use my teaching background again, but in a new way." "And will we live in Boston?" The question caught her unprepared. She hadn't yet thought about the logistical implications. I don't know yet. Maybe. What would you think about that?" Oliver reflected for a moment. "I would miss our town, friends, Grandma, but Boston seems interesting, and those Thornfields seem different from how you described them at the beginning." "They are," admitted Eleanor. "Or perhaps they always were, beneath the surface. Sometimes people need someone to see beyond their defenses." That night, while Oliver slept, Eleanor found herself contemplating the future. For the first time in years, it wasn't obscured by anxiety and fear. There was a path ahead of her, not easy, certainly, but walkable. The following day, she received another surprise, a call from Gideon. "I hope I'm not disturbing," he said. "I just wanted to inform you that we've spoken with Dr. Werner. When Oliver is stable enough, there's an excellent rehabilitation center near Boston that's ready to welcome him. And we've found an apartment in our building downtown, not far from the manor. It's small but comfortable, with an extra room for when your sister wants to visit." Eleanor was left speechless. "Of course," continued Gideon, interpreting her silence as hesitation. only if you want. There's no pressure. Gideon, said Eleanor finally, using his first name for the first time without the formal Mr. Thornfield, why are you doing all this for us? There was a pause. Because you've done much more for us, he replied simply. You saved our company, certainly, but above all you saved our family. You reminded us what it means to be human, to be connected. You brought my father back from a dark place where he was losing himself. You gave my mother the courage to find her voice again, and to me, he hesitated, to me you showed that there's still hope for those who have the courage to seek it. When the call ended, Eleanor found herself silently crying, not tears of sadness this time, but of gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt that she was no longer simply surviving, but beginning to live again. She looked at Oliver, sleeping peacefully, the signs of the operation already less evident on his young face. The healing journey would be long, but now there was a support network around them, people who cared, who wanted to help not out of obligation or charity, but out of authentic connection. To rise from the deepest abysses, thought Eleanor. Sometimes we need hands to grasp us, voices to call us, hearts that believe in our value, even when we ourselves forget it. The Boston spring brought with it not only the scent of the first flowers and the warmth of a timid sun, but also a sense of renewal that seemed to permeate every corner of Thornfield Manor. 3 months had passed since Oliver's operation, and life had taken a direction that Eleanor never would have imagined possible. The apartment that the Thornfields had found for her and Oliver was an elegant 2-room flat in a historic building downtown, with high ceilings and windows that looked out onto an inner courtyard full of greenery. Oliver, who now attended one of the best rehabilitation centers in the city, was making surprising progress. The doctors spoke of an almost miraculous recovery. That April morning, Eleanor was crossing the manor's garden, headed to her new office, a bright room on the ground floor that had once been a small drawing room for guests and now housed the nascent educational division of the Thornfield Foundation. "Good morning, Madam Director," greeted Martha, the cook, meeting her in the corridor with a tray of coffee and cookies. "Shall I bring breakfast to your office?" "Thank you, Martha. And please stop calling me Director, I'm still me." "Ah, but it's not true," retorted the woman with a knowing smile. "You've always been you, but now others see it too." Eleanor smiled, entering her office where several folders with educational project proposals to evaluate already awaited her. She had accepted the Thornfields' offer a month after Oliver's operation, when it had become clear that her son would benefit from Boston's medical facilities. The transition from housekeeper to foundation director had been surprisingly smooth, as if this role had always been waiting for her. She was examining a particularly interesting proposal for an art program in suburban schools when a familiar voice interrupted her. "Am I disturbing you?" She looked up and saw Gideon at the door, elegant as always in his grey suit, but with a relaxed expression that had become increasingly common in recent months. "Never," she replied with a smile. "Come in." "How is Oliver today?" he asked, sitting in the armchair across from the desk. "Better and better. Yesterday he walked for almost half an hour without the cane." "Wonderful." Gideon's smile was genuine. He had developed a special bond with Oliver, taking him to see baseball games and dinosaur exhibitions when rehabilitation permitted. "And you? How is the foundation project progressing?" "Well, I'm evaluating various proposals. The one for the South Boston schools seems particularly promising." "Perfect. Speaking of which," Gideon handed her a folder, "I'd like you to take a look at this." Eleanor opened the folder and found legal documents. As she read, her eyes widened in surprise. "Gideon, this is—" "Yes, Father wants you to officially become part of the board of directors of the Thornfield Foundation, with voting rights and everything else." "But why?" Gideon looked at her with an expression of affectionate exasperation. "You still haven't understood? You're the smartest person I know, yet sometimes you're incredibly obtuse." He leaned forward. "My father respects you more than anyone else. After everything that's happened, he trusts your judgment, your integrity, and he's not the only one." Before she could respond, they heard a commotion coming from the entrance hall. Harrison's excited voice resonated against the walls. "Where is Gideon and Eleanor? I need to see them immediately." They exchanged a worried look and hurried toward the entrance hall, where they found Harrison pacing back and forth with an energy that Eleanor hadn't seen in him for a long time. "Here you are at last," he exclaimed upon seeing them. "I have extraordinary news. The Department of Education has approved our pilot program. All schools in Massachusetts will be able to implement our artistic and scientific education curriculum." "Harrison, that's fantastic," exclaimed Eleanor, forgetting formality for a moment. "That's not all," he continued, with contagious enthusiasm. "They want you to present the program at the National Education Conference in Washington next month, in front of the secretary and all the superintendents." Eleanor felt her knees weaken. "Me? But—" "No buts," interjected Vivian, who had just entered the entrance hall. "You're the perfect person. Who better than a former teacher can speak about what's really needed in classrooms?" "But I've never spoken in front of such an important audience," Eleanor protested weakly. "You've confronted me at my worst moments," smiled Harrison. "The secretary will be a walk in the park in comparison." Everyone laughed, and Eleanor felt a warmth spread in her chest. This new family dynamic, this sense of belonging and shared purpose, was something she had never experienced before, not even in her family of origin. That evening, as she prepared dinner in her new apartment, Eleanor reflected on how much her life had changed. Oliver, seated at the kitchen table, was leafing through a photography book, a gift from Gideon. "Mom," he said suddenly, "are you happy here?" The question caught her by surprise. She turned to look at her son, noticing how his eyes seemed older, wiser after all he had been through. "Yes," she replied with sincerity. "I am. And you?" Oliver reflected for a moment. "At first I missed home, but now I think this could be our new home." He paused. "And the Thornfields, it's as if they've become a kind of family, right?" Eleanor nodded, surprised by her son's perception. "Yes, in a way they have. It's strange," continued Oliver, "how sometimes people who enter your life by chance end up becoming more important than those who have always been there." Eleanor approached and stroked his hair, struck by the wisdom of his words. "It's true. Sometimes family isn't just the one you're born into, but also the one you find along the way." Later, after putting Oliver to bed, Eleanor sat at the desk in the small living room. Before her were the documents that Gideon had given her that day, the official invitation to become part of the Foundation's board of directors. She took a pen and signed, feeling that she wasn't just accepting a professional role, but embracing a new chapter of her life. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Hello? Eleanor? It's Vivienne. I hope I'm not disturbing you so late." "Not at all. I was just finishing reviewing some documents. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Today was a day full of emotions." Eleanor smiled into the phone, touched by the woman's thoughtfulness. "I'm fine, thank you. A bit overwhelmed, perhaps, but in a positive way. I understand. When I started painting again after so many years, I felt the same way." There was a pause. "You know, before you arrived, this family was slowly disintegrating. Harrison was losing himself in his illness and his secrets. Gideon was drifting further and further away, and I had become little more than a shadow. Vivian? No, let me finish. I want you to know how much you've meant to us. You didn't just save the company or help Harrison with his problems. You reminded all of us what it means to be a family, to be human." Her voice cracked slightly. "And for that we can never thank you enough." When the call ended, Eleanor found herself looking out the window toward the lights of Boston shining in the spring night. She thought of the woman she had been when she had first crossed the gates of Thornfield Manor, frightened, desperate, determined to survive at any cost. And now she was a woman who not only survived, but thrived. A woman who had found not just a new job, but a new vocation. Not just a roof, but a home. Not just colleagues, but an extended family. New horizons, she thought with a smile, don't always open where we expect to find them, but at the exact moment when we're ready to see them. "I can't believe it," murmured Eleanor, staring at the documents scattered across the large mahogany desk. How did we not see this before? It was a warm June day, and Harrison's office was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Before her, Gideon and Nathaniel Whitaker seemed equally surprised. "Because no one was looking for this kind of connection," replied Gideon, taking one of the documents. "No one imagined it could exist." Nathaniel nodded. "I've worked with the Thornfields for 15 years and never suspected anything of the sort." What they had discovered almost by chance while reorganizing the company's historical archives for the new corporate museum was something extraordinary. a blood connection between the Blackwood and Thornfield families. It had all started when Eleanor had noticed a familiar name in an old accounting book from the 1930s, Blackwood. Intrigued, she had begun to dig deeper, discovering that her paternal grandfather, Joseph Blackwood, had worked as an accountant for Thornfield Publishing in his youth before moving to Virginia. But the real surprise had come when they had found personal letters suggesting a relationship between Joseph and the younger sister of Charles Thornfield, Harrison's grandfather. "So," said Nathaniel, trying to put the information in order, "if I understand correctly, Eleanor's grandfather, Joseph Blackwood, had a relationship with Eliza Thornfield, the sister of Harrison's grandfather." "Exactly," confirmed Gideon, showing an old black-and-white photograph where a young couple smiled timidly. "And from what emerges from these letters, when Eliza became pregnant, the Thornfield family strongly opposed the union. Joseph was fired and forced to move to Virginia." Eleanor gently took the photograph. The man in the photo had her same eyes, the same facial features that she saw every day in Oliver. "So my father," she began, her voice barely audible, "was the son of Eliza Thornfield," Gideon completed gently. "Which means that you, Eleanor, are a Thornfield by blood, a second cousin of my father." The silence that followed was dense with contrasting emotions. Eleanor felt the world around her oscillate slightly. Everything that had happened in recent months, her arrival at the manor, the inexplicable bond that had formed, even the way she had instinctively understood how to confront Harrison, suddenly took on a new meaning. "I need to talk to your father," she said, finally standing up. "Does he know about this?" "No," replied Gideon. "I'm certain. If he had known, the story would have been very different," concluded Nathaniel. They found Harrison in the winter garden, intent on reading the newspaper, while Vivienne painted a watercolor of wisteria. The afternoon light filtered through the large windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. "Harrison," said Eleanor, approaching with the documents in hand. The use of his first name, still rare despite months of collaboration, immediately caught the man's attention. "There's something you need to see." As Harrison examined the documents, his face passed from incredulity to understanding, to a sort of resigned wonder. Vivienne had approached, laying down her brush, and now looked over her husband's shoulder, her eyes widening as she read the old letters. "Eliza," murmured Harrison, "my grandfather's rebellious sister. The family never spoke of her. It was as if she had never existed." He looked up at Eleanor. "And you are her granddaughter?" "Apparently," she replied, still trying to assimilate the enormity of the revelation. "This explains many things," said Vivienne with a sweet smile. "I always felt there was something familiar about you, Eleanor. Not just your character, but something in your gestures, in the way you face difficulties." "The Thornfield blood," murmured Harrison, almost to himself. "The same determination, the same stubbornness." A shadow crossed his face. "My family committed a terrible injustice toward yours, Eleanor." "Those were different times," she replied, surprising herself with the understanding she felt. "And perhaps everything had to go exactly this way." "What do you mean?" asked Gideon. "If our families hadn't been separated," explained Eleanor, "I wouldn't have grown up in Virginia. I wouldn't have become a teacher. I wouldn't have had Oliver. And I wouldn't have arrived here exactly when all of you needed it." Harrison looked at her with new respect. "And when you needed us," he added, "perhaps you're right. Perhaps fate has a very particular sense of humor." That evening, in the privacy of her apartment, Eleanor wrote a long letter to her aunt in Virginia, the only relative still alive who might know something about this story. She recounted the discovery, asked for confirmations, details, any memories that could help her complete the puzzle of her identity. Oliver, who had listened attentively to the story, seemed fascinated by the idea of being linked to a historic Boston family. "So are we rich now?" he asked with the innocence of his 15 years. Eleanor laughed. "No, sweetheart, it doesn't work that way. But we found a part of our history that we didn't know. It's like in those movies where they discover they're princes or something," reflected Oliver. "Much less dramatic," smiled Eleanor. "But yes, it's an important revelation." That night, as she looked at the stars from her balcony, Eleanor thought back to the path that had brought her to Thornfield Manor. She had arrived as a stranger, a desperate employee in search of a better salary. And now she was part of a much more complex interweaving, a family fabric that time and pride had torn, but that fate had patiently resewn. The deepest revelations, she thought, looking at the night sky, aren't those that change the facts of our lives, but those that transform the meaning of what we've always known. News of the family connection between the Blackwoods and the Thornfields spread quickly among the manor staff, creating a mix of astonishment, excited gossip, and a new form of respect toward Eleanor. She was no longer just the housekeeper turned director, but a rediscovered Thornfield, a branch of the family tree that time had hidden but never truly severed. For Eleanor, however, the real change wasn't in how others saw her, but in how she herself perceived her place in the world. The discovery had untied a deep knot within her, that sense of not belonging that had accompanied her throughout her life, ever since she was a child and felt different from her peers in Virginia. A month after the revelation, the Thornfield Foundation hosted an important charity event in the manor's gardens. Boston's elite mingled with teachers, artists, and students, creating a meeting of worlds that until recently would have been unthinkable. Eleanor, elegant in a midnight blue dress that Vivian had insisted on giving her, moved with ease among the guests, presenting the Foundation's educational projects with passion and competence. Oliver, now able to walk almost normally, accompanied her, charming everyone with his lively intelligence and contagious smile. "Look at my father," Gideon whispered to her, approaching with 2 flutes of champagne. "I've never seen him so serene." Eleanor followed his gaze. Harrison, standing under a pergola of wisteria, was animatedly conversing with a group of university professors. His face, once perpetually tense, now often opened in genuine smiles. The illness was still present, but thanks to new therapies and perhaps a new emotional equilibrium, the symptoms had notably diminished. "It's as if he had finally made peace with something inside himself," observed Eleanor, accepting the flute. "I think you're right," nodded Gideon. "You know, I always thought that his obsession with control, his harshness, hid a deep insecurity, as if he constantly feared that everything could collapse. And now? Now he knows that even if everything collapsed, he wouldn't be alone." Gideon looked at her intently. "Thanks to you, Eleanor, for bringing not only integrity to this house, but also humanity." Before she could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of an elegant man with graying hair, Lawrence Harrington, the new Secretary of Education, who had come specifically for the event. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted her warmly, "or should I say Thornfield Blackwood, as the Foundation's new logo suggests." Eleanor smiled. The new logo, which combined elements of the 2 surnames, had been Harrison's idea, a symbolic way of recognizing the historical truth without denying either of the 2 identities. "Blackwood is fine, Secretary. Family history is important, but it doesn't completely define who we are." "Wisely said," nodded the man. "I followed your pilot program in Massachusetts schools with great interest. The preliminary results are impressive." "Credit goes to the teachers who have embraced the project with enthusiasm," replied Eleanor modestly. "Don't be too humble, Mrs. Blackwood. Your classroom experience has clearly shaped an approach that works." The secretary lowered his voice slightly. "Actually, I'm here also to propose something to you. We're forming a ministerial commission to reform the national curriculum. I'd like to have you on board." Eleanor was momentarily left speechless. A role at the national level? She, who just a year earlier had been struggling to keep her teaching position in a small Virginia town? "It's a great honor, Secretary. Allow me to think about it." "Of course. Discuss it with your family." With a nod, the man moved away to greet Harrison. Gideon, who had listened to the conversation, looked at her with a proud smile. "A ministerial role, not bad for someone who entered this house as a housekeeper." "Life has a very particular sense of humor," she replied, repeating the words that Harrison had used the day of the discovery. Later, as the party continued under the stars and Japanese lanterns that softly illuminated the garden, Eleanor found herself alone for a moment near the fountain. She observed the water dancing in the subdued light, reflecting fragments of stars. Vivian joined her, offering her a cup of hot tea despite the summer evening, a shared habit of theirs. "Are you thinking about the secretary's offer?" she asked, with her usual perspicacity. "Yes," admitted Eleanor. "It's an extraordinary opportunity, but you're worried about Oliver, about the Foundation, about us," completed Vivian, with an understanding smile. "Exactly. And then there's a part of me that wonders if I'm up to it, if I truly deserve all this." Vivian took one of her hands in hers. "Eleanor, Do you remember what you told me when I started painting again and doubted my talent? You told me that often our worst enemy is that voice inside us that whispers that we're not enough. Eleanor smiled at the memory. It's time to silence that voice inside you, continued Vivian, and listen instead to all the voices that tell you how extraordinary you are. Oliver, who looks at you with so much pride. Gideon, who has found in you a model of courage. Harrison, who thanks to you has rediscovered his humanity. And I, who have found my voice again. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I'll be able to balance everything. You don't have to do it alone, replied Vivian gently. You have a family now. A real family, not just by blood, but by choice. And that makes all the difference. That night, returning to her apartment with Oliver, who had fallen asleep in the car, Eleanor thought about Vivienne's words. A family by choice. It was true. The bonds they had created went well beyond the recent discovery of kinship. They were bonds forged through trials, trust, mutual respect. In the following days, Eleanor immersed herself in deep reflection. She talked with Oliver, who enthusiastically encouraged her to accept the ministerial role. She consulted Gideon on the legal details, Nathaniel on the financial implications, Harrison on the reorganization of the foundation in her partial absence. A week later, she called the secretary to accept the offer, with the condition that she could maintain an advisory role in the Thornfield Foundation and could work primarily from Boston to stay close to Oliver. Of course, the secretary accepted. Actually, I believe that your connection with the foundation is an added value, a bridge between public and private, theory and practice. The morning that the news of her new appointment was publicly announced, Eleanor woke before dawn. She prepared a coffee and went out onto the balcony of her apartment, watching Boston slowly awaken. She thought back to the day she had arrived in that city, frightened and desperate, to the first time she had crossed the gates of Thornfield Manor, to the first confrontation with Harrison, to all the challenges, discoveries, transformations that had followed. She was no longer that woman, yet she still was. Stronger now, more aware of her limits but also of her capabilities. More rooted, more secure in her value, but always faithful to those principles of dignity and integrity that had guided her even in the darkest moments. Her phone vibrated with a message. It was from Gideon. Your story is in all the newspapers. From teacher to housekeeper to ministerial advisor. The extraordinary rise of Eleanor Blackwood Thornfield. My father is so proud that he's showing the newspaper to everyone who enters the manor. Eleanor smiled, imagining the scene. Another message arrived, this time from a number she didn't recognize. It was Dr. Werner from Johns Hopkins. I just heard about your appointment. Congratulations. Oliver came to see me yesterday for a checkup. The progress is extraordinary, far beyond our expectations. You have a remarkable son, Mrs. Blackwood. Tears filled her eyes. Oliver, her brave, resilient Oliver. Everything she had done, every sacrifice, every risk, had been for him. And now, in some miraculous way, both were flourishing. The sun was fully rising now, painting Boston with gold and promises. Eleanor breathed deeply, welcoming the dawn of this new chapter of her life. True rebirth, she thought with gratitude, isn't just overcoming difficulties, but re-emerging more complete, more authentic, carrying with you the wisdom of the experiences lived. 2 years had passed since Eleanor's appointment to the Ministerial Commission. 2 years of intense work, deep satisfactions and significant changes for all the protagonists of this story. The educational program developed under her guidance had been implemented in schools across the United States, receiving international recognition for its innovative approach that combined tradition and modernity, academic rigor and emotional development. Thornfield Manor, once an impenetrable fortress of pride and secrets, had become a vibrant center of culture and philanthropy. Its halls, which once hosted only the financial elite, now regularly opened for educational conferences, art exhibitions, many curated by Vivian, and mentoring programs for disadvantaged youth. It was a Sunday in late September, and the family had gathered in the large dining room to celebrate Oliver's 18th birthday. The young man, fully recovered and ready to start university, environmental engineering at MIT with a merit scholarship, was the center of attention, surrounded by gifts and affection. "A toast," proposed Harrison, raising his glass. The years had softened his features, and although the illness had progressed, he had learned to live with it, with a grace that once seemed impossible, to Oliver, who has shown us what true courage means, and to his mother, who has changed our lives in ways we never could have imagined. To Oliver and Eleanor, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Oliver, blushing slightly, stood up. "I'd like to say something, if I may." He looked at his mother with a smile. "Mum, remember when you first told me about this job in Boston? You were so worried, so uncertain. And look at us now." He turned to the others. "Thank you all for seeing in my mother what she sometimes didn't see in herself, for welcoming us into your family, for giving me a second chance." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Her son, her child, now an articulate and self-assured young man. How was it possible that time had passed so quickly? After lunch, while Oliver proudly showed Gideon the project he was working on for a university competition, Eleanor found herself walking in the garden with Harrison. The man walked more slowly now, occasionally leaning on a finely carved cane, but his spirit seemed younger and more vibrant than ever. "You know, Eleanor," he said after a moment of contemplative silence, "I've lived a lot. I've seen corporate empires rise and fall. I've accumulated more wealth than I could spend. But only in recent years have I begun to understand what it truly means to leave a legacy." "And what does it mean?" she asked gently. "It's not the money, it's not even the companies or the buildings." He stopped, looking toward the manor where laughter from Oliver and Gideon came through the open windows. "It's the impact we have on people. It's the way we change their lives, and they change ours. It's the ability to grow, to learn, to forgive." They resumed walking slowly. "There's one thing I've never told you, Eleanor," continued Harrison. "That first day, when you confronted me in front of all the staff, in that moment I deeply hated you." Eleanor smiled. "I imagined so, but at the same time I felt something strange, a reluctant respect, perhaps, or perhaps, at a level I couldn't understand, I recognized something familiar in you." He stopped again, looking her in the eyes. "The Thornfield blood, as we discovered later, but I believe it was more than that. I believe that fate has its own way of putting back together the pieces that life has separated." "I believe that too," nodded Eleanor, "even though for so long I doubted that something like fate existed. And now? Now I think that perhaps fate isn't something predetermined, but something we create with our choices, with our courage, with our ability to remain true to ourselves, even when it would be easier to bend." Harrison smiled, a smile full of warmth and wisdom. "I like that thought." As they returned to the manor, Eleanor noticed Vivienne watching them from the terrace, her face serene, a silk scarf dancing around her neck in the autumn breeze. Beside her, Martha the cook and other members of the staff who over the years had become friends, confidants, almost family. That evening, after Oliver had fallen asleep exhausted from the celebrations, Eleanor sat at the desk in her study, a bright and welcoming room in their new apartment, larger than the previous one, but still in the heart of Boston. She opened the drawer and pulled out a leather-bound journal that she had begun to write the day she discovered the connection between the families. She leafed through the pages, reliving the moments of these last years, the challenges, the victories, the transformations. The last page was still empty. She took the pen and began to write. There are silences that last generations, silences born of shame, pride, fear, silences that divide families, that create voids where there should be bridges. But there are also encounters that seem casual and instead are appointments with destiny. People who enter our lives at the exact moment when we need them, or when they need us. I've learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in rising each time with greater awareness. That true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in authentic human connections. That true family isn't just the one we're born into, but also the one we choose, and that chooses us. The most precious legacy we can leave isn't made of material goods, but of lived values, examples set, hearts touched. It's the ability to transform pain into compassion, error into wisdom, fall into rise. And perhaps in the end, the most eloquent silence isn't the one that hides, but the one that reveals, those moments of quiet in which, finally, we manage to hear the truth of our heart. She closed the journal with a serene smile. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight, in this moment of quiet, she felt a deep peace. She approached the window and looked at the sleeping city. Boston, which had once seemed so foreign and intimidating to her, was now home. Its lights shone like kept promises, like realized dreams, like stories still to be told. And in that moment, Eleanor Blackwood Thornfield knew with certainty that whatever the future held in store, she would no longer face it alone. She had found her path, her voice, her family. She had found herself. The legacy of silence, she thought as a shooting star crossed the night sky, has finally become a legacy of words spoken, truths revealed, love expressed. And this is the most precious legacy of all.